Peace, peace, peace. Welcome to another episode of Waz the Dome. Today, I have a very special guest. You've seen him on the show before. Great thinker, great scholar. He's an author. My brother Asar Imhotep. Thank you for coming through.
Peace and blessings. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be back.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So let's get into it, man. I'm definitely interested in getting your thoughts and opinion on this first question. I heard some recent discussions you were involved in about if the idea of Black Egypt, and many were using the term Afrocentrism, um, not you, but many were using the term Afrocentrism as if it means to make ancient cultures black who were not black, like a thing of blackwashing, I guess, when it's really an intellectual framework from Malefi Asante that approaches history, culture, politics from an African worldview. Is this something that you've noticed as far as people using uh, Afrocentricity out of context? And what are your thoughts on that whole idea?
Yes, this is something that has been going on for quite some time, and there's a lot of literature that uh, expresses, basically how to combat that and to more properly define what Afrocentricity is, Afrocentrism, and the like. And so what appears to happen, because what people don't understand is that Afrocentricity is a paradigm within the discipline of Africology.
Mhm.
And so it is a research paradigm, an approach to analyzing text as well as individuals who write the text concerning issues regarding African people
Right.
in all spectrums of life. So what the layperson does who doesn't study Africology as a discipline, what they'll do is say that any and everybody who talks about Black or African people is an Afrocentrist.
Right.
You know, it's almost saying like anybody that works on a car is a physicist,
Right.
is an engineer,
Right.
right? Like there's a difference between someone who is a mechanical engineer versus somebody who changes a flat tire
Right.
or learns how to, switch batteries out. So just because I pop the hood and I replace the spark plugs does not make me a mechanic, let alone a mechanical engineer.
Right.
And so this is what seems to be the case when it comes to any phenomenon that is associated with Black people or African people. And, as soon as you mention African people and Blackness, they try to use Afrocentricity as a euphemism
Mm,
to downplay the analysis of the serious scholars
mhm.
in the field of Africology.
Absolutely. It's like it's almost a pejorative now.
Yes, and we have to do a better job of clarifying,
Hmm.
what Afrocentricity is, it as an academic paradigm, how it is used in the evaluation of texts and perspectives, you know, and benefits and issues. And so, unfortunately, especially in all fields, have this issue, this underlying issue. You know,
Wow. Hmm.
we're more familiar with this with people from the physical sciences, like quantum, mechanics and quantum field theory and the like. And so you get these lay persons that have read something and they start talking about quantum consciousness and the double slit theory and nothing appears until you observe
Observe
it.
it.
So like they don't understand because they don't read
Hmm.
the particular text, and so they come across something and now they think that what's in their mind is quantum mechanics,
Right.
and that is not the case. And so it's a similar thing here with Afrocentricity in terms of a research paradigm within the larger field of Africology.
Absolutely.
which
And
which has other paradigms as well. So
absolutely.
while it
Other
is
frameworks as
more,
well. Mhm.
yes, while it is more known and more popular, there have been other ideas that are competing,
Mhm.
within the space of Africology, and that must be understood as well.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to let the audience know, like, if they were interested in learning what the academic side or the academic framework of Afrocentricity, you can grab this from Malefia Santi, and you can grab this. And I mean, whether you decide to use it in your own studies is one thing, but to use it out of context, to use the term out of context sometimes shows that you don't really understand what you're talking about. And I, it's kind of one of those things where it gets old that everything that was once serious to us gets turned into a pejorative by a certain group. And so, yeah, I just wanted to ask you about that because I see a lot of people just using the term Afrocentric as a form of, oh yeah, he's a blackwasher. He's trying to blackwash history, and it's a lot. It's totally not that. And those books that I put up, they're not easy reads. You know what I mean? That's a real, like, a deep dive in it, man. But anyway, um, one of the other things that has come up recently, I think a lot of it has to do with the talk around the Richard Carrier and Jabari debate. Also, Smash dropping a new book on Egypt, and I've heard a lot of the
I have right here.
Black like Osiris. Y'all go cop that. And so a lot of talk about the melanin test from Diop has been, on these YouTube streets lately. For those who may not know what that melanin test was, can you explain to us what the melanin test was, and are the findings still valid to this day?
Yes, we have to go back a little bit
Hmm.
to explain the text in context. So remember that Shekinah Job, one of our pioneering scholars in classical African history, came out in the 40s and 50s. And at this time in research history, there was a lot of quote unquote scientific literature out there that was espousing that the uh, ancient Egyptians were not Black African people, that the ancient Egyptian society was a result of these basically Eurasians who migrated from the Middle East and Mesopotamia, settled in Africa, and then built the civilization from there, right? And so what Shekinah Job did was really establish the multi research and field paradigm in Africana studies, or what we would call today multidisciplinary, right?
Hmm.
And so he was attacking and bringing up various research questions from many angles regarding the peopling in the population of ancient Kemet, from an archaeological perspective, from a paleoanthropologic perspective, from a linguistic perspective, art analysis,
Mm-hmm.
an examination of philological texts, for example, of eyewitness testimony coming from the Greeks, biblical history, uh, analysis of ironworking, like the just a whole spectrum of different fields to paint a more accurate history of ancient Kemet.
Hmm.
So since the powers that be at the time were making arguments that ancient Egypt was essentially the cultural byproduct of these Eurasians, these light skinned to white skinned
Mhm.
Eurasians.
Mhm.
He then devised a test to see what was the level and the degree of melanin in the preserved mummies.
Mm.
Because if they were of, let's say, of the, Nordic whites, or even the Palestinian Jew color, that is a range that can be quantified in terms of the color, because you have these melanocytes in the dermis, and different groups, depending upon where they exist on the globe, on the level of populations, have a certain amount of melanin granules, as to say, compacted in the melanocytes.
Mm.
So if we have an exorbitant amount of these eumelanin, centers with a lot of pigmentation, this would indicate that these were very dark skinned people. If not, the hypothesis would be, of course, if we don't find this particular level, and it should be understood that even before Diop, they were already able to analyze skin samples using, what they, I believe it's called like a spectrometer or something like that. It's a spectrograph that they measure the amount in the reflections of like UV light on the skin and melanin cells, because, of course, the darker you are, the more UV light you absorb, and so they can tell the nature of the melanin by like how much light is
Mm.
or reflected from, the particular skin. So this was already a part of the scientific process even before Diop.
Mhm.
So what he was to do was to apply this method to the skin cells of the mummies of the pharaohs or whatnot. So while Shekinah Diop, even though he speaks in the so-called racialized terms, he really didn't believe in biological races.
Mhm.
But what he did was to make the argument again, like dependent. We did this one test on these mummies, and they classify the amount of melanin in the dermis that remained would classify them with the population of the, which you would call the Black Africans, on
Right.
the continent,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so that was just one particular aspect to answering the larger question. Because if they were uh, these Eurasians that have this on average skin color and lighter, then why would we be detecting this level of melanin in the skin?
Right.
Because again, when you're talking about blackness, they try to add all other kinds of stuff over the years,
Right.
right? Because you have to contend with the diversity of skin colors on the continent of Africa, from the
Mhm.
darkest of the Dinka and the Ur and the Wolof, to the lightest of the Eritrean and the Khoisan,
Mhm.
et cetera, right?
Mhm.
And the Berber. So they start over the years trying to add stuff that makes you quote unquote black. But black is an adjective to describe a color of an object.
Right.
So let's just deal with that. So let's just deal with blackness on the very basic level. So when we're talking about blackness, we're talking about a very dark and rich hue in terms of the skin color. So it wouldn't matter their nose size, it wouldn't matter their lip size. That doesn't describe blackness,
Mm.
because black is an adjective to describe the color of an object,
Right.
right?
Right.
And uh, so this is essentially the nature of the test. And there have been other tests since Diop applied to mummies
Hmm.
that have reaffirmed, what he has concluded. So when people, for example, try to include genetics into the fray,
Hmm.
right, without historical context, you may find, like, if you look at me in America, I could not run up into the Ku Klux Klan meeting without, some resistance and wondering, what are you doing here,
Right,
boy?
right.
There's nothing about me. I don't care how
Mhm.
brown my skin is. I don't know. I'm definitely not considered light skinned by any stretch of the imagination. But looking at me, just looking at me, you couldn't tell that I have European ancestry, in my DNA.
Hmm.
My European ancestry would have no indication on whether you consider me black or not.
Right.
So even if without a genetic analysis, when I die, and if I was mummified and they was to examine my skin cells, they would say that this person is, of black African descent, or at least it would cluster. You would say, to be more scientific, that this person would cluster
Hmm.
with those populations that exist closer to the equator, most dominant in Africa. That's how you would scientifically, discuss that, right? So
Hmm.
whether Europeans and Asians came into Egypt and interbred with a number of the population, their outer appearance was still of a rich, dark, melanated hue, to the point that even the Greeks themselves, when they described the ancient Egyptians, had to use words in their language for black and dark,
Hmm.
not on some metaphysical, people try to make it metaphysical now, that the very
Yeah.
word melanin is at the same root as the word uh melanchronos, one of the words that they were used to describe the ancient Egyptians.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden it's some philosophical dark, like, no, they described a physical characteristic along with, their skinny limb proportions and their curly hair and all this. Like, this all these are physical descriptions, so it can't be that means I would have to argue that when they talk about the limb proportions and the curly hair, that's also metaphoric too. So
Right.
what does, bandy legs and curly hair symbolize in Greek culture? Like, you have to go through all of that, just to not admit that, yes, they're describing the people,
Mm.
not just an individual.
Hmm.
They're describing the people. They have black skin, curly hair,
Hmm.
thick limbs, and all this other kind of stuff. They're black footed, right?
Let me
And
let me let me ask you
but
this, because it kind of brings up a point. But I didn't watch the debate with Carrier and Jabari, but I read the blog that Richard Carrier wrote before he did the debate, and there was some interesting things in there. His, especially his idea of black supremacy. I'm not even going to touch that right now, though. But he said that um, when you know, whenever you are using a source, he pretty much said not to use a source before 1950 or something of that nature. And so whenever you hear something like that, and then you hear, of possible eyewitness accounts, um, and I'll preface it by saying this: I know that the pretendian movement does that a lot, where they'll the sources that they use are pretty sketchy and they're really old sources. But it seems that that may be a little bit different when it comes to studying ancient Kemet, right? Due to the fact of how old the civilization really is, right? What is your idea on not using sources before 1950 when it comes to understanding who the people of ancient Kemet were?
it's stupid. Uh, and people don't understand the nature of research, and carriers should know better,
Mm-hmm.
because it's never about the source.
Mm-hmm.
It's always about the quality of the analysis and the quality of the evidence that supports or disconfirms a particular argument.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that you can't use a source from 50 years or older. It just has to be in conversation with more up-to-date analyses. And then you have to really evaluate, is there really much difference in what is the nature and the difference? That's why you do the what we call the literature review, because you have to be able to see the evolution of thought
Mm-hmm.
regarding, what was considered good information back then to what is considered good information now. What is the difference? What is the different strategies? You have to know these things. So you're going to have to cite the source to be able to give a up-to-date analysis. Just because a book is modern does not mean that is of quality.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the implication that one senses when one tries to make that argument. So it's never about how old the source is. It's about the quality of the analysis, especially if you're dealing with primary sources. So it's not about the source itself. Having sources is only relevant to the extent that we need to know, is this your analysis? Are you the one who came up with this particular thought? If not, where did you get it from?
Right.
So that we can go back and see if you are relaying the argument from the particular source as they intended, as we understand that they intended,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or are you
Mm-hmm.
taking it out of context, or are you just making it up altogether?
Right.
Because as a researcher, you're building off of previous research.
Mm.
So, it's not too much original content and ideas that you can come up with just on your own without any kind of reference to past literature. And so when you're doing research, what you're really doing is analyzing the timeline on a particular field of information. And because history is not recorded as a continuous live stream feed on our computers, we only have bits and pieces of information that we're trying to string together to tell a cohesive narrative of historical experiences, human experiences, and the like,
Right.
or natural experiences, whatever.
Right. Right.
Um, so what because we get information in chunks, there is fundamentally gaps in our knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And so what a researcher tries to do is fill in the gaps to make the gaps more closer together until we can get a more continuous stream, of information.
Right.
So this is why it's important to not only know the the events of history, but to be able to examine the evolution of ideas and frameworks for analyzing that history.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, I have these conversations with Dr. Shamarka Keita quite often. And, he's really good for that. So
Mm-hmm.
he not only is able to go into and analyze primary skulls in DNA analysis, what he does is he goes back as far as written records are on any given subject, and will give you an outline of the evolution of thought. Who were the key players who introduced
Hmm.
this idea, and
Hmm.
so that you get a better understanding of how we are, how did we get here
Hmm.
today. And this gives you a more complete picture, of whatever it is that we're talking about. And this is what I would encourage any,
Yeah.
future researchers to keep in mind. It's not just about, I have uh an ancient Egyptian text and here's my
Hmm.
interpretation. Well, how does your interpretation weigh against somebody else's interpretation? Why did you choose this word as a translation, or this series of words as a translation for this term,
Hmm.
versus Gardner or Faulkner or whoever the other Egyptologist is?
Hmm.
So when you're reading, dissertations and the like, you'll see, for example, a researcher say, I'm following this translation by, I'll say, Faulkner. However, on this line here, I rather interpret this as this because of my reasons that I
Right.
list here. Right.
Right.
Like, this is how scholarship is done. So, getting back, being long-winded,
No, you're good.
with the source
Hmm.
information, it's not about the timeline. It's about the quality of the analysis. Like, because, for example, if I say 5 times 5 is 25, and I wrote it in a book 50 years ago, it's no longer, it's not going to be invalid because is that equation in the book is over 50 years old.
Right.
I could put 5 times 5 is 25 in a book from 1913. I could
Hmm.
put it in the book in 2026, and it's still going to be the same. It's just the quality of the analysis.
Hmm.
And so that's what people try to use that as a scapegoat to try to dismiss your information without critically challenging the information and,
Mm.
and the processes. So we have to be careful of that and be able to recognize that in the debate.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And, just to add on, like, and that a lot of just to understand the context and nuance, um, of the time of the source and the political atmosphere of what was going on is extremely important. And like you said, it's not necessarily the source itself, it's the analysis. And if we were going to dismiss everything that was written before 1950, we wouldn't know the things that we know today. I mean, that's not how that works. And it seems, and honestly, too, to whenever we think of African history being the first history there is, um, it seems a little I want to,
Suspect, yeah.
yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
um,
we should just throw all our books away
yeah, yeah,
from 50
absolutely.
years ago.
Right,
Tell
right.
libraries to get rid of all the books from 50 years. If that's the case, just have a annual burning of all the
Annual
books
book
50
burning, right?
years
Oh, let's get that
and
50-year
back.
mark. Let's burn it, right? You had a video up that you did a few weeks ago. Really great video. It was about a new way of African-centered scientific learning called O.G.U.N. If you can you explain what O.G.U.N is in
Okay,
in
thank
this
you.
context?
All righty. So OGUN is an acronym, and you spell OGUN OGUN. And the O fluctuates depending on the context,
Hmm.
but the GUN fundamentally remains the same.
Hmm.
And so we can talk about the observations of God, universe, and nature.
Mm.
And it is just it serves multiple political, social, and paradigmatic issues regarding the relationship of African people to the sciences
Hmm.
versus the STEM or STEAM,
Hmm.
argument. And if I can, um share my screen,
Yeah, hold on real quick.
you would have to.
Yeah, I'll give you. Yep, hold on. Where is it at? Where's it at? Love. Hold on 1 second, and I got you. Where is the? All right. Okay, we found it. So go ahead. Go ahead.
All righty. So um sharing the screen, and just to give a visual
Mm-hmm.
to so that people can see it. So this is the acronym O.G.U.N. And so as I stated, um the O in the O.G.U.N can fluctuate. So we're talking about the study of the organization, or the systematic, um the systemic organization of God, universe, nature, in which we can coin a term organology.
Mm.
Save that for a different time. And
Mm-hmm.
so, again, it can be the organization in terms of the study of, or the systematic observations
Mm-hmm.
of God, universe, and nature. And for folks that don't know, O.G.U.N, from the cultural perspective in Africa, is pronounced differently in various different places. In Yoruba, you would say Ogun, and in ancient Kemet, for example, there's a cognate in the deity Sekhmet. The Khem in the Sekhmet is cognate with Ogun. Another conversation for another day. But Ogun is normally associated with metallurgy, war, and hunting. However, underlying all of that is really its association with technology and invention.
Mm.
And even today, as Barnes states in this text, Africa's O.G.U.N, Old World and New, that O.G.U.N is associated with modern technology. And so if he's associated the personification or the spirit behind technological invention, ultimately O.G.U.N is the spirit of science itself.
Mm.
Right. So
Right.
you have to know about chemistry, you're going to have to know about metallurgy, geography, because you got to know where to find the minerals and all of that. And so I won't go into all of that, but these are just more evidence showing that O.G.U.N is associated with technology.
Mm.
And so, uh, and your peoples can read that on their own. And so the O encompasses what we would call the methods, the epistemology, pedagogy, andragogy. So pedagogy is the teaching of how to teach children. And then, of course, andragogy is how to teach adults. Ontology, the scientific study of being, measurements, etc. So all of those methods and paradigms all fall under the O, aspect of O.G.U.N. And when you become, a specialist in the O.G.U.N fields, we like to use African terms. This is part of that Afrocentricity,
Mm-hmm.
uh, taking back and looking at it from the perspective of African people. But not only that, from even a political standpoint, being able to name,
That's Kuji
have naming
Chakalia,
rights. Yeah,
self-determination.
it's self-determination. So, you know, we would call those people in the Yoruba language, for example, an Oluwa or an Olori, meaning a master, right? And if you were saying an Oluwa, that breaks down to Olo or chief or master of character,
Hmm.
right? Or being. Um, and so that would be on the ontology, and we can do a whole show on what EY and its expansive meanings are. But so that would be, so when there's O.G.U.N as that it embodies a wide range of subject matter, and then you become an O.G.U.N if you master
Hmm.
one or more of these subject matters,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So that's that. But as I stated before, that the acronym, the root of it is GUN, God, universe, and nature.
Hmm.
And God encompasses the human aspect of everything.
Right.
And so this is dealing with African culture, spirituality, language, linguistics, warfare, arts, ethics, right? And I'm gonna get into why that is important to the other ones. Because when we're talking about STEM and STEAM,
Hmm.
they just want to focus on mathematics and the like,
Right.
and physics and so-called hard sciences. But that's why they added the A in STEM
For
to
art.
make
Right.
STEAM for the
Hmm.
arts,
Hmm.
because you have to have a basis to stimulate the creativity to be able to do
Hmm.
this kind of work.
Right.
And so, but of course, us being African people, all of that is automatically instilled in the culture and any paradigm and perspective that we do.
Right.
So, but you also have to be able to study that to, and we'll see why in a minute, because I'm gonna be quoting Dr. Amos Wilson, and I think I have his book on me. If I can pull it up. Sorry, of course,
Oh
Blueprint
yeah.
Black Power.
Hmm.
Uh, so, but anyway, so universe encompasses everything that's not on Earth.
Hmm.
So astrophysics, cosmology, particle physics, quantum mechanics. And there's going to be some overlap because we
Yeah,
know
for sure.
particles exist on Earth.
Hmm.
But when we're talking about particles and quantum mechanics, there's no location for it.
Hmm.
It's kind of like the Orun in the Yoruba tradition. Orun is not specifically a location, but it is a location. Like you can't pinpoint like Orun's over there.
Right.
It's like when you're talking about the quantum world is everywhere,
Right.
but
Right. Right. Right.
you can't see it. So this is what we mean, by this. So what's not on Earth, and then nature, what is on Earth?
Hmm.
Biology, physics, agriculture, technology. And so the idea of the O.G.U.N fields is to be able to link, all of these things into an all-encompassing um, continuous field of study, so that people can better see the interactions of these so-called separate fields,
Hmm.
and to be able to hop into one or the other, but all in the service of African people. So you got to be able to give people their history, culture, science of war, because if you're building technologies, you're going to have to be able to defend your spaces and all that. And then of course there's the ethics behind everything.
Hmm.
Should we be creating a nuclear bomb the size of Texas?
Right.
What would that do to the earth in general? Like,
Right.
just because you can doesn't mean you should,
Right.
like
Absolutely.
stuff like that. So I won't go into the whole lecture, but the whole God, I was just showing here that the concept of God in African languages applies to any agent that has the ability to do work, and
Mm.
it's associated with human beings. So
Hmm.
that's why the God part of it is really dealing with human culture,
Right.
human history, the power of the human mind and spirit as it applies to culture and history. So
Right.
that's what that is. But
Wow.
this is where I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I was just saying, wow, that's deep.
And So, but this is what I wanted to read.
Hmm.
And so it's 3 slides,
Hmm.
and we can go from there.
For sure.
But Dr. Amos Wilson in The Blueprint for Black Power, which is the book that I held up earlier, he says we must recognize that the major function of education involves securing the survival of a people, advancing their interests, enhancing their quality of life. So this is what O.G.U.N, that's the objective, right?
Right.
Educational establishments are as much a part of the defense of the defense establishment of a people as is their army.
Mm.
So, this all has a defensive quality to it as well. A people bereft of educational institutions dedicated and designed to defend their interests and to solve their problems, because that's ultimately what culture is. Culture is the collective way a population solves its problems. That's all that means. Are essentially a defenseless people, a people vulnerable to exploitation of other peoples as well as vulnerable to annihilation. We cannot advance or appropriately defend our interests and lives as an African people if we place the fate of our community in the hands of the educational establishments of our oppressors and enemies, and in the hands of those Africans educated in them. African peoples and African leaders should be the recipients of an African-centered education. No African should be granted leadership in the African community who has not been certified through education or experience
Hmm.
as African-centered in consciousness, identity, and orientation. In the absence of such institutions today, it is incumbent on the so-called predominantly Black colleges and universities in Black African studies programs in these and the predominantly white institutions to develop teaching, training, and research departments in all areas vital to African communal interests. Intense education and research must not only occur in areas of history, culture, political science, and victimology. And he defines victimology as toting all the elements of Black suffering, followed by white establishment dictated or defined recommendations. So these are the folks who all their research is about the what bad has happened to Black folks,
Right.
how we're always, underpaid, underrepresented, da 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 da. It has
Hmm.
its place, but that seems to be the focus of a lot of, scholars and so-called Black studies. Continuing, every department in predominantly Black colleges and universities should require all their students attend courses taught from an African-centered perspective and designed to achieve African-centered ends. I'm gonna pause here, but then continue. This is important for the O stage, right? We have to be able to interject, African-centered perspectives and paradigms and philosophy, and that's part of the research methods. And it's going to be clearer in the next sense, but that should be the minimum and basis of the requirement before we start talking about the speed of light.
Right. 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 Right.
You know,
Hmm.
and so all of this again is dealing with education and the development of African-centered educational institutions. So this includes business, economics, the social and physical sciences. So all of that is encompassed in O.G.U.N,
Mm.
right? And I'm sorry, and I meant the goon part. I
Hmm.
said the O part in the last slide, but I meant this to refer to the goon. I mean the G in the O.G.U.N part.
Right.
Right. So anyway, so, for example, Black students should not only be taught business administration courses, which only prepare them for work and servitude in white-owned businesses. They should also be taught the development and administration of Black-owned businesses to finance. And this is, it may not seem important, but this is a very important line because Black businesses face issues that other businesses don't. So
Hmm.
you have to teach Black people to administer and develop Black businesses with the knowledge of the history and the issues concerning, our practices, lack of funding, et cetera, et cetera. Like that has to be a subject in the business and economics
Hmm.
discourses, especially regarding African people. So to continue to finance businesses from within the Black community, to solve business and economic problems facing the Black community, to penetrate the white business world as entrepreneurs, to grab some of that quote unquote white money, export businesses, to compete as international business persons in the physical sciences. So Black students should be instructed in the politics of science, the sociology of science. Therefore, what social, political, economic, cultural formations are conducive to the creation and continuing development of science and technology? What are the scientific and technological issues and needs in African communities? How trained African scientists and technicians can profitably work in the interest of African peoples. So when we go back to the O.G.U.N, this is why the God and the communal, all of this comes into play,
Right,
because it's going to tell us how and for what purpose is this study being used for.
right, right.
Because if you just leave it up to regular STEM education, none of that what Dr. Wilson was talking about is going to be discussed.
Mm,
And so if you become an astrophysicist, you can only work currently for European establishments and institutions teaching astrophysics.
right.
And you would only be able to teach and be interested in the stuff that interests them and
And
that
al-
benefits their interest.
and also too for the student, I think that approach, like especially whenever we are dealing with pedagogy and teaching children, teaching it from us in a from a standpoint that does not, well, they can't see how it relates to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or the context in which these sciences began and the African centered approach to seeing this, it can make them disillusioned with it. It's like, why do I need to know this? Why should I care? Instead of showing like maybe some, and I hate to use the word sometimes because I feel like sometimes in the way that it's used, it can also be a little bit suspect, but proto sciences in Africa where we begin to explore these ideas, from the different philosophies that we had, but whenever you just present it in a lot of cases, to the youth as, okay, this is astrophysics or this is this and this is that, with no type of cultural, without a cultural paradigm to attach it to, it's not interesting.
Exactly. And what people don't realize is that, of course, the transatlantic and trans-Saharan slave Holocaust has, wrecked uncountable disharmonies and brought certain, great disharmonies in the lives of African people.
Hmm.
However, those tragedies have also provided great opportunities for growth and expansion.
Mm,
And if you are able to, like, one of the things that Amos Wilson talks about is trading on your identity,
hmm.
right? That's what cultures do. And if African people are running away from being African, how are you going to be able to compete on the world stage when everybody is presenting and selling you their culture?
Right.
So even if you talk about Afrofuturism,
Hmm.
why when we're trying to talk about Afrofuturism, are we imitating ideas and concepts that come out of the minds of Europeans? So if you pay attention, like all the space movies for Europeans, you know, we're 2,000 years, 500 years in the future. And in their minds, there's no dark skinned people.
Mhm.
There's all white folks in the future. You see
Right, right.
all that, and they're
As
still in the lead and the command.
as
Like,
I've heard it called, we have become a figment of their imagination.
exactly. You know, it's just one random, two random black folks on the spaceship, you know, on Star Trek and all this. And you look at the Jetsons, ain't no black folks.
Right.
If they had, you know, their way, black folks would not be in the future.
Yeah. Facts. The
Yeah.
Negro problem is still here. You know what I'm
It's
saying?
still here. And they constantly express that. But if we're going to talk about a future, who says that in for an African centered uh creative,
Mhm.
that the future has to look like a whole bunch of electrically run technological advance? Why
Mm.
couldn't the technology itself be an enhanced nature?
Right, right, right,
You know,
right, right, right,
like
right.
like why why wouldn't it exist in the context of a greater, you know, natural setting instead
Mhm.
of an artificial? Like that's their
Absolutely.
mindset.
I think the sister that wrote Children of Blood and Bone did a good job with that.
Yeah.
Do you you disagree?
No, I haven't
Oh,
read it, but
oh
I'm
yeah, no, it's
familiar
great.
with the text.
Yeah, yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think she did a great job with that because it is, they are dealing with technologies, but it's not it it's it's like they went back to more of a understanding nature type of way of life as well. I was reading something or watching something the other day where, just pondering the idea that, how in Europeans, what they tend to do, and I see them say this online and I see them say this in their interviews at times, that they view um, they view technological advancement as an advancement in society, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, obviously it is. But in other cases, that those same technological advancements have been used to murder, kill, and destroy the planet. And just the idea that advancement is linear, like
Yeah.
instead of that, circle of life that we deal with as African people, who's to say that scaling back on this, on where we're headed, isn't a good idea, especially when you have all of, like we're dealing with the idea of where AI is going. A lot of social scientists and even actual programmers are like, hey man, we probably need to chill for a minute before
Mm-hmm.
we continue to build on this, because we don't necessarily know where it's going. But whenever you're obviously dealing with technology through a purely capitalist standpoint, without any type of culture that centers the planet and the humans that exist within it, you're going to have these problems. It brings me to my next question. I'm definitely excited to hear your answer on this. I was in a speech I was reading the other day. It was from Du Bois to the Association of Negro Social Science Teachers. He was talking about, and this was later on, I think, believe in 1960, closer to the end of his life. Um, well, he spoke on, while we became more assimilated into American society, we would begin to lose who we are culturally. In 2024, do you think this is where we are as a people, especially considering the growing movements that deny that African Americans are even of African descent?
Yes. But I want to frame it this way,
Hmm.
that Homo sapiens, well, nature in general,
Hmm.
there's a natural tendency to want to not do work
Hmm.
and get the most, outcome out of everything. Everything's trying to fall into an equilibrium.
Hmm.
And quiet is kept, most humans don't want to fight.
Can you expound on that some?
What I mean is that the vast majority of us does not want to constantly come up against resistance.
Yeah.
They want to be able to fall into an equilibrium and not risk, not have a great risk of losing, much of their material uh living or whatnot,
Hmm.
including, of course, their life.
Right.
So that's just a human thing. That's nature in general. That's the
Right.
whole concept of entropy and everything, like the smell, like once you hook the bottle or whatnot, and then the smell comes out and it can't go back in,
Hmm.
but it tries itself to fill out the space in an equilibrium manner,
Hmm. Right.
right?
Right.
And so there are those of us who have this spirit of, we love to fight. That's what
Yeah.
we do. We wake up in the morning, we exercise, we practice, we do what
Yeah. Yeah. The 50,
42
yeah,
or
52
52
blocks
blocks for
going.
me. That's just what we do. We love it.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of us are not like that.
Right.
So the transatlantic slave Holocaust stripped most African people, of their sense of agency and sovereignty and the like.
Hmm.
And we just ultimately want to be left alone to our own
Hell
devices.
yeah. Right.
And we just want to live comfortably. We don't want no smoke. And, we just gravitate to where the power and the prestige is.
Hmm.
And so if the European currently has the power and prestige, then we want to lean there because they already have a system in place that rewards people for assimilating to their culture and ideas.
Right.
And there was, in the beginning, they didn't want that for us. So they did everything in their power to keep us separated from them.
Right.
You can't get into our schools. You can't live into our neighborhoods. You can't even drink out of the same water fountain as we do. And this forced this population of African people to only deal with themselves. So their culture and ideas and everything was built upon us existing and being forced to only live amongst ourselves. So, we couldn't get into their ice cream shop, so we had to start our own. We couldn't get their money, we had to start their own banks.
Right.
We had to start our own construction, ambulance, funeral services and the like. We had to do things our own way. And so that fostered a greater sense of business in terms of creativity and identity for African people. But, we always like to compare ourselves to others, and it seems that they are doing better than us. So we need to get access to what they have access to.
Right. Right. Right.
And so what we do is we striving to assimilate into their spaces.
Hmm.
And the more and more barriers we broke down, the more and more people wanted to leave and be disassociated with Black folks because we are the bottom of the tier in the social hierarchy in this country.
Hmm.
And so any proximity to whiteness appears, in at least in their eyes, guarantees them greater comfort,
Yep.
and prestige.
Hmm.
And then of course you have these revolutionaries who pop up every generation, fighting against that. Your Malcolms,
Hmm.
your uh Stokely Carmichaels, your Stephen Biko's, and all
Absolutely.
this other kind of stuff, right? Your Harriet Tubmans, your all these, trying to get more on the self-reliant, and so out of that tradition comes Afrocentricity on
Hmm.
the educational front and all this other kind of stuff, right? And so we suffer from this. Their ice water is colder than ours, and we
Right.
believe the myths that they told us about themselves.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
we wanted to be closer to them, and
Hmm.
that is what's problematic. And so it's been a long process, but to your question, and specifically in 2024, I think that that project of assimilation has, reached a fever pitch to where now when you're talking about black businesses and self-reliance and agency, they're thinking that you're talking about devil worship or something. Like, is there something in their minds? Like, what do you mean? Like,
Right. Right.
and you have it even to the point now where, like, I'm noticing, especially among women,
Hmm.
um, like just scroll down your TikTok page
Hmm.
and hear the way that a lot of people are talking. More of us are even talking like, and I just don't understand why we just
Right.
da 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 da. It's not an issue of perfect versus imperfect English or whatnot.
It's imitating. You're imitating someone.
You're imitating like that corporate Karen,
Yeah.
as they say,
Yeah.
like that's become the standard voice,
Right.
and not understanding that your power is in your people and your culture.
Mm.
And so what we have to do is to gain power
Hmm.
with an African centered mindset so that we become the prestige.
Right. Right.
And so for too long it's just been these people with loud mouths
Hmm.
saying but not doing anything, because the people respond to how is your living.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because for them it's about comfort,
Hmm.
right? Like how does this black stuff translate into food, clothing, and shelter,
Right.
and good human relations? That's ultimately what they're asking.
Hmm.
And so this has to be put more prominently, in the discourse.
Right. The material conditions of the
Yeah.
people.
Exactly. And so we don't got to be nothing super deep like, the ancient Egyptians, they with their third eye and the snake,
Yeah.
the crown head, like, they was in tune, they had conversations with Jehuti, and they're like, no,
It ain't got to do all that,
you
right?
gotta, that's not what was going on. That was their, like, ancient Egypt is a perfect example of how relying on your own culture can helps you to prosper,
Mm.
because the ancient Egyptian has the minds of the world,
Hmm.
and they try to invade or force anything on you.
Right. Right.
The culture was just so fascinating, the thought was just so fascinating that 2,000 plus years later, after the final temple was closed, we're still talking about them, debating about who they
Hmm.
are and what
Right.
color they are and what this means, and deciphering, having intellectual discussions on Ma'at
Right.
and
Right.
whatnot,
Right.
right? But it is, so they even have an aesthetic
Hmm.
that is grounded in them, and so people are copying their aesthetic.
Right.
And so, if I may share
Yeah.
screen again,
Hmm.
uh, I want to just go. Let me reopen that file. And so this is something that I was talking about in that same discussion
Hmm.
on O.G.U.N.
Hmm.
So, if we're building, for example, shopping or educational institutions, like, what is the architecture, the African architecture, going to look like, and how are we going to decorate,
Right.
right?
Right.
If we have this type of aesthetic, it gives people job opportunities
Mm,
in terms of creating, like, because only we can do what we do like this.
absolutely.
You get what I'm saying? Like,
Hmm.
if who's going to do the murals on the wall, and this is all AI generated, but it's
Hmm.
just to give you a glimpse of possibilities,
Right.
right? In terms of design structure,
Hmm. Hmm.
like who's
Oh,
going
that's
to do
beautiful.
all of this?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? Like, what is this institute? What building is this? Is this the technology building at, the new Sheikh Anta Diop University?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like,
Right. Right.
what is this? This is the office building. Is this, this could be the DMV,
Right.
for all we know, in the Africa town.
Right.
Like, you just gotta, like, think largely, for those like me who are in the tiny homes and stuff like this, and building, self-sustainable eco villages. How
Mm,
would you do that? What
right.
would all that involve?
Right.
How many acres of land? What farming techniques will we be using?
Hmm.
We'll be decorating the home when I invite a sister over. Is all African everything,
Right.
so
Right. Right.
comfort, and the artwork speaks to the culture. Like, so if you're selling real estate, for example, right? Like, how are you marketing the spaces to African people? Like, this is the kind of bedroom I would have. I'll put a
Right.
little bit more
Right.
color,
Right. Right.
some
Right.
some oranges or something like that,
Mhm.
and kind of interlace. But like, this is kind of stuff that, you how would you design this? Where would we get the wood from to make these objects
Right.
in the back, right? Like, how would we design this space? How would we keep, air the air quality inside, and the temperatures, saying good and the like? If I have an Airbnb and this is the bathroom that you come in, what kind of sense of
Wow.
feeling? How would you see yourself?
Right.
We got to think, you know, a bit differently. If I got
No,
my studio
absolutely.
apartment.
Because it's like it's more than just aesthetics. It's the idea of building from the ground up from as yourself. I mean, I think whenever we think about what it means to be African centered and to have agency over yourself, just like the idea that you brought up about how some Afrofuturism is just building upon the ideas of European futurists, right? And when we have our own cultural way of doing things, and but yeah, and it kind of leads me to the next question I wanted to ask you. And this is the last question, but um, I think it's an important question. When you look at the O.G.U.N model, and then you also look at the STEAM model, and we mentioned how they had to add the arts in there. But when we talk about being African centered, and when we think of mythology and allegories, how important is myth and allegory in African cultures, like to explain a concept, and how effective can mythology be in explaining said concept?
Yes, it's very important, primarily for this reason, that the vast majority of human beings into relatively recent times did not transmit information via writing.
Mm,
So everything was oral tradition, or it was substituted with, because we think of writing simply as like alphabets and stuff like that, but you can
hmm.
also communicate by tying ropes in a certain way,
Mm, right.
designing quilts, the way that you dress.
Mm,
You can set up architecture in a certain way. Like, there's many different ways in which information was transmitted traditionally, not simply just oral, mouth to ear.
right.
But the key underlying thing here is part of that G in the O.G.U.N,
Mm,
and that's pedagogy.
hmm.
How do you teach and transmit information from one generation to the next.
Right.
And so in an oral tradition where there's, you know, they're not printing 900-page books
Right.
like, the blueprint for Black Power.
Right.
And so they're not going to, go back and read, all these pages. You have to develop a process of creating narratives that transmit important, not only historical, but ethical and ethical information and values to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to do that in a very creative way that stays in their minds.
Right.
And you have to do this through song and dance, through mythologies.
Mm-hmm.
And then you create a educational system that those same mythologies can be exploited at various different levels of thinking and understanding.
Yeah.
You know
Right.
what I'm saying? So like
Mm-hmm.
if I was to create a random story, let's just say there was a prince, by the name of Blue. And he was trying to court this princess by the name of Yellow.
Mm.
But there was, a conflict about their families that prevented them, you know what I'm saying, from joining together in holy matrimony, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the father, the king of the princess, gets wind of her interest in this rival family's prince, and he sets up a slew of challenges that seem insurmountable, um,
Right.
for them getting together. But over time, the Prince Blue had shown that he had good character and that he could defend and support the kingdoms, and their possible marriage, Yellow and Blues, would bring these two kingdoms together and it would bring peace and harmony.
Right.
Right. And so he Blue, surpasses expectations. He gets the queen, the princesses, hand in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
They marry, they unite, and they have a son that they name Green.
Right. Right. Right.
Right. Like, and so it's a good children's story on the first level of mythology.
Mm-hmm.
The second level of mythology, when the kids get older, we can talk about certain history between two groups that they represent,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the importance of family and values and a man's role in the family and how he's going to be tested. And these are ways that you attack,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So that's the second level. But then there's a third level that's just a scientific level. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, yellow and blue makes green.
Right.
What about wavelengths? What is this, in terms of the interactions that make this particular color? And how would this, apply, for example, if we're examining computer screens, and if you got Photoshop and all this and you're designing, making any kind of 3D modeling, like you can take the same story
Mm-hmm.
and have it apply in different contexts. It seems elementary on one level, but then you come to find out years later that there's some underlying deep realities in
Right.
which this story conveys.
Right.
And that's exactly what our ancestors did. And
Mm.
so you see these mythologies, they're not just simply, stories that they tell around the fire.
Right.
They were part of a lifelong, educational system.
Mm-hmm.
And so the older, we like to say initiations, all the time, but it's really just the socialization. It's just really the graduation to the next level of education that's standard in the community or whatnot. So this is the importance of mythologies or whatnot. They're creative ways, rooted in our oral traditions to convey values, histories, paradigms. Even you
Hmm.
can use the to proselytize Afrocentricity if you want. Whatever it is, it's a way, because again, just like as I stated earlier, everything in the universe is seeking the path of least resistance.
Right.
And so this is not the path of least resistance in terms of,
Absolutely
hey,
not. Right. Right. Right.
I'd rather be just told the story. I can do it, but you put it behind a beat, I'll learn it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it takes a different acumen to be able to go through text and
Yep.
analyze and sit here, and we want to be able to prepare those who have that acumen
Hmm.
to be able to be in those power positions, because they're willing to go beyond their comfort zone
Right.
to ensure the safety and expansion and maintenance of family and community. And so I hope I answered your question.
No, man, that's perfect, man. I appreciate you, brother Asar. If you can, everything will be in the description, but just kind of let people know where they can find you and what you're working on these days.
Yes. Well, you can find me first and foremost on my website, and simply asarimhotep.com. ASARIMHOTEP.com. And usually you can find me on Facebook or uh, Twitter, or I guess it's X now, um, TikTok, all under Imhotep 1906 or some variation. But you type
Hmm.
in Asar Imhotep. So to my knowledge, I'm the only Asar Imhotep in that
Right.
combination that, if you type that in, you'll be able to find me. And so in terms of what I'm working on, more research text,
Mm.
as always, and getting ready to publish some other texts from, because I started, the Madu Andela Press. And so not only have my books have been published through it, I've published two other texts.
Nice.
One is a translation, Prayer in Africa, a translation from French, and then another text by Dr. Chilimamela Mukenge, who wrote a text called Muntu Zombie.
Mm.
And so I'm also getting ready to do an edited work uh, called Paths to Ma'at.
Wow.
And it's
Okay.
a text dedicated to Dr. Mubabinge Bololo.
Mm.
And so we already have a number of scholars who have given me their
Nice.
and the like.
Nice.
Then, working on volume 2 of Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt.
Nice. Nice.
Uh,
If you guys don't have that, go ahead and cop that from. Can they get that from the website?
yes, they can.
For sure.
Indeed.
Well, Asar, man, it's always a pleasure, brother. I appreciate your work and your continued efforts to educate our people, man. I salute you, brother.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you again for having me.
No doubt.
Anytime.
Peace.